Hello, edTPAers. Today I'm going to talk about how to review your work for Prompt 4 in Task 1. Academic language, your very favorite part. So the question is about supporting students' language. You have in 4A, you are only to choose a language function. The best thing to do, like this student did, is just say my language function is. The safest thing to do is to choose one of these functions up here. And then in 4B, it says identify a key learning task. Now, that means in your plans, in your lesson plans, identify a key, and I would say language task, that provides students opportunities to practice using the language function, the one that you've chosen here. So here it would be evaluate. You want to give the lesson and the day, like if it's lesson 1, you want to give the number of it so that the scorer will know where to go. So all you're going to say here, remember you're identifying a key learning task that provides students with opportunities to practice using the language function. Evaluate will be lesson 2, and then they go on to describe just a tiny bit of what they've done. But this sentence right here actually is unnecessary. All right, so now we get into the part where they describe language demands. But I want to just real quick refer us to a handbook. So everybody's academic language handbook is very similar, except for early childhood and for SPED. And I think the library, school librarian, a little bit different. But for most handbooks, one of the things the score is going to check is that they want to make sure that the language function that you discuss in 4A and in 4B, they want to make sure that they are consistent. So if you chose evaluate as your function, then it needs to be clear that they are evaluating in the task. And so we want to make sure to avoid that one. If the rest of the rubric is about supports, lack of supports is a 1. Supporting just one language demand is a 2. So having general language supports that address 2 of the language demands is a 3. Here we start talking about the quality of supports. So we stop talking about general supports, and now we're talking about targeted supports. And to get a 4, then you want targeted supports that address all of the language demands. And if you want a 5, you've got to do all of 4, plus you want to meet the needs of students with different levels of language learning. Now, of course, your URLP explains this very well. It also gives definitions for your parts of the rubric, language demands, our vocabulary function, discourse or syntax. It describes what the functions are, vocabulary, discourse, and syntax. And it describes what language supports are. There is also a academic language handout that goes along with every handbook as well. So we're going to be looking now to see if how they've done. So you want to make sure that you demonstrate you at least know what these things are. Now, with 4C, you are to describe vocabulary and syntax or discourse. Notice it says plus at least one of the following. But if you look at the rubric, we know from looking at the rubric that you get no credit for doing both discourse and syntax. I recommend to my students that they do not describe how they support both discourse and syntax. Instead, they should put their efforts toward describing supporting either discourse or syntax. Okay, so this person has said the vocabulary needed to complete the learning task is, and she lists the vocabulary. I want you to notice that this is short, and this student made a 5 on this. And discourse, she tells what the discourse is, and she's very careful to include the term evaluation in order to show that her discourse is using the function. So that was quite clever of her. And so she talks about the discourse being a task where they're explaining, but she brings in the evaluation part as a way of showing that they are using the function in her discourse. Now, it is through 4D that the evidence for Rubric 4 really is found. The score is going to look at 4A, B, and C to see if you know what academic language is and if you know what you're doing. But 4D is how you start to score well. So you've got to talk about the supports you have. You have to talk about how you're going to support the function, how you're going to support vocabulary, how you're going to support the discourse, and how you're going to support students with specific language needs. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, I want you to notice what she's done here. She's taken so much care to very carefully bold this to support the language function, evaluate, to support vocabulary. So it's very clear to the scorer that here's the evidence for function supports, here's the evidence for vocabulary supports. And then she describes the things she does, and then the scorer decides if she's describing supports that are general or supports that are targeted. If you don't know the difference, then I suggest that you go to my playlist on academic language and watch a few of my videos there where I discuss the difference between general supports and targeted supports. Now, this is the part that I want to focus on here. She talks about students with different language needs. And I have a lot of students who get all bent out of shape about this because they'll say, well, I don't have an English as a second language student. I don't have students with IEPs. And this is what I remind them. Language needs. Language. Reading, writing, speaking, listening. So if you have no language needs, then you're telling me that there is no child in your classroom that can read better than they can write. You're telling me that there's no child in your classroom that has difficulty expressing themselves verbally. Is that correct? I would be shocked if that were true. And remember that even if you have a classroom of very high functioning students, then you can always think about the needs that they have to expand, to advance, to enrich them. Don't forget about your gifted students. So it's not just, and also make sure you know the difference between speech difficulties and language delays, because I'm talking really about language needs. expressive language, how well they can express themselves in writing or speaking, not whether or not they have a lisp. So that now it could be that their speech, they have a speech disability that does encumber their language. If that's the case, it's something that you need to address. But it's not just speech is the thing I want to get across. We're talking about how well they can express themselves. So don't think you've got nothing to write here. You do. Think about the needs of your students and think about them of how you're going to support those specific students in addition to these supports up here that you're describing in order to support these particular language demands. So additionally, what do you do with these students? So I hope that's helpful to you for taking a look at this task, and I will see you around next time. Have a good day.